Good evening, and thank you all for coming to the Meetup. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dave Kirk. So Dave is currently the CTO at a company called MTM Technologies, and he was formerly the managing director of RPA, or Robotic Process Automation, and digital labor at KPMG. So while at KPMG, Dave developed a framework to help people understand the confusing world of automation technologies. He has generously agreed to share this framework with us this evening. Dave?
Okay, so the main intent of this, I think the one interesting thing that sometimes people struggle with is what's different, why now? And I think there are several things that kind of happen that make this different now. One is just simply the availability and the affordability of really high power computing, right? Cloud, of course, has helped that tremendously. I mean, you can go out there and get really powerful servers and GPUs for like pennies on the hour kind of a thing, right? So there's the availability of computing power. Then there's this unprecedented amount of data, right? And I'm going to talk about that on the next slide. But the amount of data that's available now is like something we've never seen, right? And I'll just give you one little factoids off the next slide, that literally 90% of the world's data was created in the last 2 years. Right? It's staggering, right? And you think about IoT and what that's going to mean. A connected car will deliver roughly 25 gigabytes of data an hour. One connected car. Right, so you think about the amount of data there. So that's the second factor, and the third factor is just the advancements in algorithms. So like neural network technology and things like that. That algorithm development, leveraging this data, it's a very powerful combination. So these are the things that are really making a difference now. The box up there is saying, hey, look, there's about $9 trillion in knowledge workers now that's being spent. That they expect roughly by 2025, 6 trillion of that will be delivered by digital labor, right? And then down below, roughly, that's the equivalent of 130 million workers, right? Well, it's kind of a lot when you think the stat up there is there's about 230 million knowledge workers right now, right? So it becomes some interesting things, right? This is I made a comment about outsourcing, an interesting little kind of example of how much of an impact it was to the outsourcing. One of the big outsourcers that we deal with started a second company, and they said, look, you guys are going to do this work with automation. You're going to put the first company out of business. Right, that's literally was the mission of the second company. It's an Indian-based company, and they started a second company to put the first company out of business. Right, that's the impact this has. So, all right. So I just wanted to clarify a few things. I'm not sure if you guys can read this, but I don't like to read right off the slide anyway. So, but I want to clarify, and Michael and I talked a little bit about some of this before the talk, terminology, right? Because like particularly things like I'll get into like machine learning, people really misuse some of these terms, right? AI and machine learning, and they'll call almost anything machine learning. But structured data, unstructured data is important terminology. I'm not sure how familiar you are. I kind of like to just say, look, rather than ask people to raise hands, I'll just kind of quickly say what it is. I mean, structured data is data where it's very clear what the meaning of that data is. So it tends to be like databases and spreadsheets and predefined forms. So you know exactly where to go find the purchase order number. Right, because it's in this spot all the time, right? That's structured data, right? Unstructured data, which is what most of the world is based on, right? So I mentioned about 90%, 80% of the world's data is unstructured. So this is all the stuff out there in social media, in emails, in medical journals, in articles, and things like that, right? You know, they talked about Watson Oncology. There's 160,000 cancer findings a year that are published. No human doctor can keep up with that. But Watson reads 1 million books a second, right? It can process, hundreds and hundreds of gigabytes per second, right? So, it's important to be able to deal with unstructured data. And the very next piece is what helps us do that, right? So natural language processing. Again, often misconstrued. People think of natural language processing, they think of OCR, right? And optical character recognition has been around for years. And all that is the thing when you run your piece of paper through a scanner and it says, okay, I'm taking that print and I'm turning it into ASCII characters. That's all it does. There's no idea what it means, right? That's what natural language processing does. Natural language processing takes that unstructured data and says, I know how to read a paragraph, and I can tell you the important points in this paragraph. I can tell you the sentiment of this person's email, or I can listen to the call and pick up on the video, on the audio, what they're saying, what they mean, and whether they're angry or happy. Because if a person calls in and he's really, really angry, you don't really want to start selling him new products, right? You want to solve the problem he currently has, right? So the natural language processing comes in several flavors: natural language generation, natural language interaction, natural language understanding. There's a lot of NL something or others, right? But it's all about really truly understanding the non-structured data and making sense out of it and building things that are called knowledge ontologies, right? So very, very important. It's one of the biggest, because you couple that with the data, it's one of the biggest factors in artificial intelligence, right? You can turn all that unstructured data into meaningful content, right? And then finally, machine learning, which I like to feel is one of the most important aspects of artificial intelligence, right? What does the bold say? I highlighted it in bold. It says, you know, it learns and improves from experience without being explicitly programmed. Okay, so unlike what a lot of people tell you, an Excel macro is not machine learning. Okay, if you are telling the machine what to do and it's just recording what you're doing, that's not machine learning. All right, machine learning is the kind of thing that happens in a neural network. Right, you throw hundreds of thousands of examples at it, right, with something called labeled data, which I'm going to give you the data, and I'm also going to give you the right answer, right? So figure out what the relationships are of these thousands of inputs, right? And then it does it on its own. That's machine learning, all right? So when an RPA tool, for instance, tells you it has AI built in, be careful, right? Because it may have support for certain things, but most RPA tools do not have AI built into them by the real right definition of AI, which would include machine learning, right? So I want to just start by kind of getting some terms down. All right, so I mentioned this earlier. This is really this is the main slide for the discussion today. But we really struggled to kind of say, let's put our arms around this and let's not call everything RPA, all right? So, and in a few slides, I'm gonna put something up that shows you some tools. But what I want people not to do is to panic. Like, if your favorite tool isn't in the category you wanted to be in, that's okay, right? Because this is just a guideline, okay? I used to be really, really cautious about putting the slide up with the tools on it because people get really offended, right? So it's just a guideline. And like I said, some of them are starting to migrate over, and some of them are like sitting in the middle, right? But it is important to have different tools because, like I said, you don't want to go pay millions of dollars for Watson to solve a swivel chair problem. So on the far hand side, class 1 is kind of like we call it basic process automation. This is where I would put RPA, right? Here and somewhat in here, but clearly not the third category. So over here are the tools that are doing, they're using structured data, they're doing repeatable tasks, right? Things that are explicit activities. So you can actually say, here are the steps to get this activity done. Not done differently every time, right? It's good if there's a lot of frequency of it, but also not a lot of frequency of change, right? But what's really different about RPA that was not true of tools in the past is it's done at the user presentation level, all right? What's that mean? What it means is it acts like a human, all right? So what's different is instead of I need to get data from the system. I need an IT guy to go write an interface to this application for me so I can get the data. That's not what RPA does. RPA says, well, what does a human do when they want to get the data? They log in, right? They log in, they go to the appropriate place, and they do a cut and paste, right? Well, that's what an RPA tool does, right? And that's what these tools do. They operate at the presentation layer. They look like a user. You want to get data, you give it a user ID and a password, right? That's how it does it. If we end up having time to play the video at the end, you'll see a ton of that, right? It looks just like your screen in hyperspeed, right? As you would do a task. So it does a lot of cut and paste activities, stare and compare kind of activities. When there's multiple systems, our biggest client was a telco company that had bought a lot of smaller telco companies, and they had like a dozen order entry systems, right? So what did? We built bots that could take orders from each of these dozen and get it into the one and only meaningful order entry system by doing the appropriate conversions and then just kind of pasting the data in, right? In 6 weeks, they were saving $2.6 million, right? Because they had 100 people doing this in the center, right? So that's the kind of, that's perfect for here, right? But then we had no problem going over here and figuring out there's going to be this class where we had to get Cliff happy and include Watson and all the other, other AI tools. But we also said, yeah, there are tools that sit there that are a little bit more than RPA, but they certainly aren't cognitive tools, right? And so we said, let's again, this is 2 o'clock in the morning. Let's carve out, since I was the IT guy, I started pulling out certain features that differentiated these tools from these tools. So one of them, for instance, is a lot of baked in knowledge. So there are tools out there that fall under like the RPA umbrella that come with thousands and thousands of workflows built into them. So you're not starting with a blank screen and saying, what do I want to do, right? So one tool in particular, as a good example, is a tool from IPsoft called IP Center. These guys used to be a RIM. They would do all this remote infrastructure management. They've been around for years and years, and they noticed all these problems we're solving, they're the same for all of our clients. We should have a tool that does it for us, right? And they built this tool. Lo and behold, now that's really their primary business, right? So IP Center has 22,000 built-in workflows that are used to solve IT problems, right? And then the second piece, also I'll use IP Center as an example, is this learning assist I've talked about, right? So a learning assist is not really machine learning, but when IP Center gets a problem it can't solve or can only solve to a certain point, it does what it can, it collects as much data, it processes it with the built-in workflows, and then it says, sorry, Mr. Human, I can't solve this problem, right? I need your help. Then what it does is it goes into record mode, and it captures everything you do, and then at the end says, hey Dave, I know how you solve this problem. Are you good if I publish this to the knowledge base with these steps? You say, sure, right? Now the knowledge has been expanded. So next time it knows how to solve that problem, right? That's a learning assist. But it's not machine learning though, right? They'll tell you that that's machine learning. I mean, I deal with these guys all the time, right? Not machine learning. And I publicly had this argument during when we're kind of joint presenting stuff, right? And then there's often an awareness. UiPath absolutely has this. I'm sure a lot of the other tools, actually Automation Anywhere does, WorkFusion probably does. I don't know as much about the details, but the ability to handle unstructured data to a degree, not natural language processing necessarily. You can't just throw paragraphs at it and it gives you meaning. But what you can do is say, look, I think I was talking to somebody about this earlier. You know, you have a form that comes in, but it's not always in the same format. You can say, look, I need you to go get the order details. And you start with like, here's where the stuff is. And then a form comes in that doesn't really fall into that template. And you say, oh, okay, well, for this one, the purchase order is over here, and down for this one, the purchase order is over. And after a while, it starts getting smarter. It says, oh, okay, I get it. They're not all the same. I can find the purchase order. I know what it looks like. I know what the kind of things, characteristics that it typically has. And it starts to be able to handle multiple versions of that piece of input. All right, so that's what I mean by it'll have support for unstructured data. It doesn't have to come in a specific format. We can say, I'm going to go down to cell C5, and that's where the PO is, right? So that's again different than natural language processing. So tend to put chatbots in here. A chatbot is a good example of something that can come in here because there's a limited amount of like, you know, I was literally on the phone with a company today. You know, we're building out some chatbots, and you know, you give them 4 or 5 example questions, right? You don't have to give them every question, but you say, okay, look, I need to reset my password. You know, I can't get into my system. My password seems to have expired. All those kind of things are ways to say, hey, I need to change my password. I need to, you know, reset a password reset, right? So you give it 4 or 5 of those, and then it figures the rest out, right? So not true natural language processing, but it also has a little bit of capability built into it. So chatbots is a good example there. And as I mentioned, things like IP Center for IT, Redwood for finance. So Redwood is the equivalent in the finance area. It has built-in workflows for doing finance operations, accounts payable, accounts receivable, stuff like that. So that's category 2. I'm going to go to category 3, and then I will pause for 2 reasons. Is I really have to stop talking, and B, I want to have a little bit more interaction. You guys can ask some questions because this is kind of like one of the key slides. But let me go first to class 3. So there might be a little bit of a gap here. There's a much bigger gap here, right, between 2 and 3. So truly, the single biggest differentiator that I like to say about an AI cognitive system is you don't program it anymore, right? It's literally the beginning of what we call the third technology. What's the word I'm looking for? Not generation, but I can't think of the word. So, yeah, well, so you know, there's the tabular period, right? There's the programmatic period. So we went through the mechanical devices that could tabulate things. And then we went to programmatic. And then we're now into the cognitive. And what's different about the cognitive is you're no longer writing explicit code, right? You're throwing a bunch of data at it and saying, figure this out, right? And so that's the biggest differentiator to cognitive, right? It has this ability to figure out problems on its own. It processes massive amounts of data. You can throw literally millions and millions of records at this and say, it's either what's called supervised learning, where you give it the answer and then it figures out the patterns, or you say, I got a bunch of data, I have no idea what the relationships are, but I think there's relationships in there. That's unsupervised, and then it spews out all the hypotheses about the things it thinks are and what you can conclude, right? So that's the kind of things that a truly cognitive platform can do. A great example of cognitive one we're all very familiar with now is self-driving cars. And there's several things that a self-driving car is using. So for instance, computer vision, absolutely AI-based, right? Uses something called the convolutional neural network. That's how you process all these images coming in. Then predictive analytics, like I predict if you go to this intersection, you're probably gonna kill this person, right? It has to process all this data and do this predictive analytics in real time. And it's processing mass amounts of data. That's the difference. When I did AI in the 80s, we always used driving as a thing that a computer couldn't do. It's like funny, a computer can add 1 million numbers, right, in an instant, which you can't do, but you can drive a car and a computer can't, right? It's considered tacit. It's like built in. You can't describe how to drive a car with steps, right? So there's no step that says, well, there's a person here, a dog there, there's a traffic light there. What do I do? That's not how you program a car to drive, right? So it used to be that we figured that's not the thing that a computer is going to do. The difference now is there's massive amounts of data coming into it. All these sensors that can be used to process every little thing going on, right? And that's what a self-driving car does, right? So it's a perfect example of a truly cognitive, something that everyone can relate to, right? But there's also, like for instance, Google uses it, Uber uses it, for all the, what's the best route, predictive analytics, right? Google will now start doing some of the Waze things where you say, I want to get from point A to B. It'll tell you what the best time to leave is. It doesn't have a crystal ball. It's saying, based on the past history and the millions and millions of records I have about traffic, I'm telling you the best time to leave is this time. That's predictive analytics. So even things like Google and Uber are using predictive analytics and true AI, right? And you don't really think about it. Amazon does the same thing when it says, oh, you bought this, you might like this, right? That's predictive analytics, right? So that's kind of like the AI. Okay, I'm done, and I'm hoping somebody has questions or comments or criticisms. Like, why do you talk so fast? So the comment was made that attending a UI get-together, that the guy that was speaking made a comment that the RPA was a path to AI. It's called the gateway drug, right? So that we like to call it the digital gateway drug. It's what happened to me, right? So I got into RPA, and I'm neck deep in neural networks and AI. I love it, right? So it does start you getting that way. The thing about RPA is, and this is what I try and say to people, is there's a reason there should be RPA only tools, right? There are companies today do so many tasks. Talk to Andrew, right? That literally they don't need to be doing, right? His team built these automations and took hours and hours of research off the table that they now say, instead of going out there and querying all these websites, they're building strategies for clients. They're taking the results and saying, let me help you understand what this means to your business. As opposed to, let me just do a bunch of cut and paste for you and put this big report together, right? So there are tasks that, our company, you'll see the example. These tasks that the bot can do in literally 5 minutes, these guys have spent a couple hours doing, right? So there's a reason that RPA and plain old RPA tools should just kind of stay in that category to do those things. Now, what happens when I start combining that with AI? Well, now I can make decisions and do things, right? Cognitive automation, right? Watson's more about making the decisions. I'm not sure it does a lot of the activities for you, right? So you kind of combine these things. So it's a valid statement. It kind of gets you going. It's a great starting point. AI is a much longer journey, right? I talk to clients and you mention neural networks and their eyes glaze over, right? It's like, okay, don't go there. I had one of the guys that worked for me brought up right across the street at one of my clients, and the guy asked the question. He goes, well, if you got into concurrent neural networks, or then you could do, like, are you serious? These are business people. They weren't even IT people, right? But it is the differentiator. So AI is the game changer, right? You can create new business, new opportunities. There's all kinds of new things you can do. RPA, sometimes people use it for filling potholes. It's like, I got these 4 systems. They don't talk to each other. I'm not going to get to replace them for the next 3 years. Until I do, let's connect them via RPA, right? So some people like to say it's filling the potholes versus paving the road, right? But there's a need for it. Every company you talk to has a need for automating some of the things they've been doing for years manually. But it's a valid statement to say it's kind of a path to get you more comfortable with automation. You start getting into the aspects of, you know, learning and where, oh, you know what, this would be really good if the system could learn from its mistakes as opposed to doing it over and over again, right? But it's a great question, right? Yeah, Frank Casal used to love that term, the digital gateway drug, RPA. What else? A million of them. So I generally, and I know this is supposed to be RPA, but again, I'm trying to entice Andrew to have a session on AI as well, right? And we could talk about neural networks and whatnot. What's the difference between a recurrent one and a convolutional, right? Things like that. But they're actually, you can do this at a level where you can actually walk away with the knowledge you need to say, okay, my eyes aren't going to glaze over the next time someone says neural networks to me. So like I mentioned, the vision programs, almost every major provider has AI platforms now. So you can go out on Azure, and you can actually steal time, any computational time, and you can build all kinds of, not just vision or natural language processing capabilities. Amazon Web Services has the exact same thing, right? You can go out, TensorFlow is open source, right? So I had TensorFlow running on my laptop and built neural networks, right? It's all public source code, right? You know, you get Keras and a bunch of other, you know, Python, you know, libraries, and you're good to go, right? So there's a whole bunch of them, and I'll slap some of those up in a slide that's coming, right? But if you think of AI, there's really, I like to think of three big buckets, right? One is natural language processing, right? And we talked about that, right? And that's huge, right? Because of what it can do with the predictive analytics capabilities of processing all that data, right? So there's natural language processing. There's the predictive analytics, right, that go with that. So you have all these things you can do from a perspective of understanding like all this unstructured data, but then the predictive analytics that you slap on top of that, where you say, look, I've looked at literally 1 million records in the past. I can now tell you the likelihood of X. That's predictive analytics, right? And then you have the whole category of you mentioned computer vision, right? So computer vision and other kind of IoT kind of processing. I have an AI project with one of the states. And these guys send people out to these salt barns every so often to say, how big is my pile that's left? And when do I need to order again? It's manually done, right? The guy walks in the barn, goes, okay, I think I got about this many yards left. And do I need to order some or not? You know, we're installing cameras. We're watching the operations. We're doing a double check. We watch how many truckloads go out, you know, as they fill, how many scoops go into a truckload, how many trucks go out. And we have cameras in the barn as well to say, here's what's left. We're computing the volume without anybody looking at it, right? That's all computer vision. Right, so that's another big bucket, and other IoT type of capabilities, right? So there's a line out there. I'll slap some up in a slide coming up. All right, so the next couple of slides are really nothing more than an elaboration. So this is category one, right? There's no rocket science here. It's saying, hey, look, this is the before state. I've got a bunch of stuff that I'm doing. I'm doing it over and over again. It uses structured data. It's very well defined, but still that person's sitting in this chair and doing it, right? So you take these folks that were doing this order entry for the telco. They're literally going over to screen number one or application number one and saying, I gotta get this data, blah, blah, blah. I'm gonna paste it over here. Oh, this is a slightly different format. Let me go and fix that. And by the way, these graphics are all available in that paper, Demystifying Digital Labor. So I'll put the 3 papers out, and you guys can take a snap of the cover or something like that, and you just search for KPMG and my name, and you'll find these papers. So what's important here? So it's rules-based. I can say, hey, this is the way this works, right? There's certain rules about making decisions. It's rules-based. If you want to get an ROI, it probably needs to be high volume. And if not, at least high volume, highly complex with lots of steps. So if someone's taken 6 hours to do it, okay, there's probably an ROI. But if they do it once a month and it takes them 10 minutes, there's probably no ROI, right? Transactional, like I mentioned, structured data, and repeatable. Right, so those are kind of like some key features to say, this is a good candidate for RPA. Notice it doesn't say lots of thinking involved, right? All right, so the next one I've already talked about. So this is class 2, and this is the IT example. So this is all this is saying. Look, you know, out of the IT environment come these alerts, right? This system immediately says, okay, I understand IT alerts, and goes through and resolves. They're claiming 88% of them. Right? I've talked to clients using it, and they're not quite getting those numbers. And then it passes some number on, and there's like 4 or 5% that it actually starts, collects a bunch of data, draws some conclusions, and then in some environments pages somebody or sends an email or calls. You can set up to do whatever you want. and it goes to a human. The human executes it, and it watches. It goes into this record mode, and then it promotes with the permission of the human, it'll promote that data back to the knowledge base, right? So that's an example of class 2. We talked a little bit about class 3. So this is the cognitive or AI, and there's so maybe say 3 important features of a typical AI system, right? So one is how they perceive things, right? So it used to be, a lot of us can relate to the idea that you wanted something in a system, it was all about mice and keyboard, right? Now there's a whole different level of perception. You can talk to things, right? Mention computer vision, right? There's tremendous in the public works divisions. Computer vision, I mean, think about the cameras that are on pipes and all these infrastructure pieces, bridges that are doing real-time analysis on, hey, gee, I think there's a crack, as opposed to sending people out in the road, to do things, right? So computer vision and the way you perceive things is huge. And we're all getting used to speech, right? It's going to get to the point, we talked years ago about the fact that mice and keyboard eventually go away, right? And it's slowly but surely happening, right? I don't know how many different speech-enabled devices I have at home. And we're moving into emotion and sentiment. So there's a lot of these tools will have sentiment analysis built in it. Very important in customer service, right? Chatbots, for instance, can very quickly sense they're getting angry. I'm sending them to a human. Okay, they're frustrated. I'm not solving their problem. I can tell from the way what he just said to me, so I'm sending him to a human, right? So that's the whole sentiment analysis piece, right? Very big in customer interactions and whatnot, to get things escalated to an agent, right? So reasoning. So this is kind of like what I mentioned about like the predictive analytics. It's predictive analytics typically if I'm processing lots and lots of data and I'm saying with X% certainty, with X% certainty, I'm going to say that this customer is going to. So one of the neural networks I built at home was just as a project as part of the course I was doing. You built this. They had bank customers, and had all this data about these customers, and then it would predict, is that customer going to leave the bank, right? And so you had this whole training set of that same characteristics, and did they leave or didn't they, right? And you train the system, and then you run tests to see how you did. And I was getting like 92% accuracy on the model that I built, given this input. So then, of course, you run on different input and say, look, I'm going to predict this. That allows you to get ahead of it, right? You can now go out and say, all right, I'm going to start doing some customer retention activities for this client because he's indicating, I can see the indicators that the human couldn't pick up, but the system can, that he's likely to leave, right? So that's this whole idea of doing these kind of predictive analytics and hypothesizing things, right? So and then the learning piece, which I think is just huge, and that's why I think it's very important I think an AI system without learning is great for a month, maybe a week, and then it's what we used to do in the 80s. We would write all these decision trees, right? And they were called expert systems. And how we do it, we interviewed people, and we said, okay, this guy's really good. He knows what he's talking about. And you took all these answers and you built this decision tree, and you wrote it in Lisp and Prolog, right? What was it? Lisp was lots of idiotic, silly parentheses or something like this, right? So you wrote it in Lisp and Prolog, and then a week later, it was obsolete. And if you're not back there fixing that tree, your expert system's not so smart anymore, right? That's the difference with machine learning, right? Every time the machine makes a decision, it's right or wrong, it learns from that decision. It gets better and better and better with every decision it makes, right? That's why the learning is so important. So I put a bunch of typical characteristics of AI stuff in the circle around here. I did all this work while I was at KPMG, so I figured it was appropriate to leave the KPMG logo on these slides. But these are some interesting, back in 2014, we very quickly said, if we don't do things differently, we're not going to have a lot of the business we currently have, right? So you think about KPMG, it's kind of like tax, audit, and consulting, right? You said, okay, consulting may be safe for a while, but gee, tax and audit, if we don't get on top of this, it's going to be fully automated. And they're going to say, why do I need you guys? I got this automation. So, but then again, if you bring something to a client and say, I'm going to combine both. So we did that. I mentioned Watson. And one of the things that we very quickly did was, let's talk about our audits. We used to, in this particular industry, I'm not going to get into real details because I don't want to get too much out there, but we would audit by doing, we'll take a statistical sample. We'll take a look at this set of loans. It's roughly 6% of what you've got in this portfolio, and we'll draw conclusions, right? Okay, instead we come back, we partnered that with an AI system and said, we'll look at them all. We'll go through 100% of your loans. We'll do it for less and we'll do it faster and we'll do it more accurately, right? So a lot of the things you'll see down here are advisors. What financial advisor can possibly say, I don't need AI? When the AI system is processing millions and millions of records a second, history, historical data on stock trends and everything else, you can't keep up with that. You don't partner yourself with an AI system, you're gonna be out of business, right? I think on here that it mentioned legal firms. One of the top features when legal firms are going after resources now is how good are you at e-discovery? How well do you know the tools? It's like the number one choice, or characteristic that they look for in hiring these, kids at this age, right? So anyway, so that's some of the AI stuff. Again, I'm going to pause and see if there's any questions now that we've gone there. All right. Well, I know that there was a question about tools, and this is where I don't want anybody to be offended, right? There are definitely tools that I said so for instance, OCR is a great example, okay? These tools right here are all moving over here and maybe even here. Why? You have a tool like Episoft, which really made it was a great OCR tool. Now it reads a document and it understands that document. It can look for things and draw conclusions about the business. So you train it in a certain area. So I know one place it was used was again in more exact applications, right? And it became phenomenal at recognizing all the important things in a document. So it's not just converting it to ASCII anymore. Now it's saying, here's all the things you need to know about that document, right? So those things are moving to the right, okay? And so you'll see a lot of these tools are building in extra capability. So again, some of them already appear multiple places, right? Like I said, I would be cautious about, I don't know of any of these tools that have what I would consider true AI built into them, but they'll tell you that. Right? I think the Automation Anywhere even has something called an AI bot or something like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, IQ bots, right. And they've got the meta bots and the IQ bots. Yeah, exactly. They're not that smart when you think about it, even IQ bot. Like maybe it should be called a zero IQ bot. But what that's really about, again, is kind of getting familiar with forms and how to process stuff. But it's nothing without you kind of walking it through the process, right? So that's why I say be cautious. But these are some of the tools. The chatbot tools, is Artificial Solutions, I think it's Teneo. A great platform. You can go out and you can build all these language-enabled applications, like with really way easier than you ever could do it before, right? You mentioned Amazon or Microsoft. Same thing with Microsoft, right? Built-in natural language processing capabilities. Phenomenal. I went out there and I played one of these things. I connected to some code. I published it, and I was able to play it off the web, or as a web service, right? Just by in the Microsoft Azure environment. Right, so like I say, over here you've got, like I mentioned, TensorFlow, which is a neural network platform that you can run in any kind of Python environment, right? With a bunch of Python libraries. You have Amazon Web Services, and you've got Google DeepMind, which really actually leverages TensorFlow. IBM Watson is a pretty complicated platform. Every time I go to use it, I just can't get my arms around all the different pieces. But they have a similar kind of thing. I would call it a little bit harder to use. And then there's a ton of other AI tools as well that, like, all the service providers are coming out with them. So Infosys has Nia, TCS has Ignio, Wipro has Homes, right? Watson Homes, I guess they got that, secret thing going on. So this was to the question about tools, which somebody had asked. I can't remember one of you guys that was nice enough to ask a question so I could drink. Any other questions? So, Kofax has a little bit of everything. I only know that because I actually worked with the Kofax and I presented at one of their conferences. They have a suite. It's not one tool, but it's a suite. I said to them, I love the fact it's a suite because then you grab what you need. You're not paying for everything unless you need it, right? So there are definitely companies. So Pega bought OpenSpan. Well, that's interesting because Pega's a business process management tool, right? Now they have an automation tool built into it. I think you're going to see that. I think in time, RPA is going to be like Excel. Everyone's going to be doing it. You'd be crazy not to, right? Because it's automating stuff you just don't need to do manually anymore. You do it manually because you've always done it manually, right? It's a terrible answer, but it's what most people will tell you, right? So I think in time, it'll be just like any other tool set, right? It's a must-have, right? But there, like you said, like WorkFusion appears in a couple of different places here. I can't say enough, this is not a perfect science. So let me first come, maybe for the folks on the phone, let me try and repeat a little bit of that. I'm not going to try and repeat all of that, but I think the comment was made that at least the provider, PwC, is going out and building bots. Clearly, these would be reusable bots that they then make available. You can check in and check out, right? So the world, you know, as most people know, the world's going to an as-a-service model, right? A lot of people don't understand what that model means when you really get into the details of an as-a-service model, but it pretty much means you pay only for what you're using, and you don't worry about what's underneath in order to deliver it. So if you want to get an application, you're not worrying what server's running on it, how much storage am I using, you're just paying to get that application, right? So what you're talking about is kind of automation as a service, right? So when we as a group were talking about this, we talked about building, we should, like in this case, I was working with the financial services team, and I said, we should build a suite of tools that are appropriate for banks. You know, bank A is not that different than bank B. Let's build a suite of tools on multiple platforms, do these banking, you know, and then you can kind of provide that as a service, right? So that's what I would put that category in. If PwC has gone out and built 1,000 bots, clearly they're saying, I know a lot of people use these, so let's just go and put it out there, because they're not going to put it out there if like, oh, I know one person that does this. So, okay, well, that makes sense as well, right? Right. So one of my papers, Governing the Bot Revolution, talks about how it makes sense to centralize this stuff, right? I used to work with some of these really big clients, and they had like a dozen business units. Why have everybody go out and pick a different tool, have to get educated on it, have to learn how to maintain it? That's the other thing that that paper talks about, is the fact that this is so simple can be devastating as well, right? When change happens, the bots break, right? Trust me, I was debugging one yesterday. We have a partner who every time they send us a quote, it seems like they're changing the format of the quote, right? So, and that's the other thing I guess I should keep in mind if you want to run that last video. Let me just do this. I'd ask you not to take these. I have limited left of hard copies, but if maybe just pass them back. So the paper I was talking about was this one. Governing the Bot Revolution, right? Yes, if you search my name and Governing the Bot Revolution, it'll come up. It should come up under KPMG Institutes, right? Is what it'll come up under. So just so people understand, demystifying digital labor, fairly lengthy. It talks about these three classes in actually more detail than I just did, as fast as I did. But you can read it at your own speed. So that's what demystifying digital labor. Governing the Bot Revolution is about, you can't just turn these things loose and think they're going to just keep on working, right? And they really should follow the same kind of guidelines, anything else that was developed in IT, change management, governance, et cetera, right? That's what that paper is about. The capitalizing on robotics is more about, how do I know if I have an ROI or not, right? It's also pretty detailed. I had a guy working with me on that one of my financial architects, and that's all about, here are the things you consider. How much volume does you have? How complex is it? How fast does it change? You know, how much maintenance is it going to require? You know, that kind of a thing, right? So that's kind of like the blurb on the three papers. And how many, I can't remember, we have, okay, so that's a good one. We should talk about that for a minute. What is this? Oh, that's this. Okay, so let's go to this. All right, so this is also, I think I stole it. I think it's the exact graphic out of this paper right here. But anyway, same content either way. It may not be the same graphic, but the same content. So people often think RPA, I'm saving money, right? That's one benefit, but there are so many more, right? So you can save money in different ways, right? I can do this a little bit faster now. Well, I also have, and I'm doing it with cheaper. So a bot, even if you took the most extreme estimate for how much it costs to own a bot, it's going to be about 1/3 the cost of an offshore resource and about 1/5 the cost of an onshore resource. And that's a pretty generous, like, okay, let's assume they all require like $10,000, you know, to do this, blah, 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 right? But even then you have the savings. They also work 24/7, right? They don't take coffee breaks, they don't take vacations, you know, they don't get sick, right? So you have that benefit, right? And that's kind of like, okay, that's great. That's kind of like some financial perks. Interestingly enough, people always worry about the job factor. What are these people going to think when I bring this to their location and say, hey, I can do some of your work in automated fashion? What we found very quickly, and I wanted to write it up into the paper, and it should be viewed this way, is guess what? If you take, pardon the expression, I'll just say the garbage work off of someone's plate, that's not what I was going to say, but since I'm being recorded or whatever, broadcast, I better. So if you take the garbage work off someone's plate and say, hey, guess what? You now have the time to be more strategic. Take Andrew's team, sorry, I keep calling me Andy because I have a friend, Andy. Take Andrew's team, right? They stopped going out there and screen scraping data off a web and started building strategic plans for these partners that they had, these customers that they had. Who's not going to enjoy that work more, right? It's more, you're making more of an impact. You're using more skills, right? So employee satisfaction can be an important point. Audibility, right? Guess what? Unlike a human, where when you say, why the heck did you do that? And he goes, I don't know. I'm not really sure. These things build logs. You know exactly what they did and why for the entire process that they just did, right? So they're much more auditable than a human is, right? Quality, reliability, consistency, predictability, it's the same thing, right? Unlike a human, right? If you tell a bot to do something this way, it's going to do it that way every single time. It doesn't go right one day and left the next. It looks at this and says, based on this data, I'm going to do this thing every time the exact same way. So of course they're more consistent and predictable. I always say at the same time, you program them wrong, they can fail a lot faster than a human can, right? But that's all about getting it right the first time. Scalability, great story. One of the service providers I was working with talked about they had an IT collapse one time in June. They brought in all the resources they could. They showed the gradual ramp up of all these people coming in to get on this issue, right? Very slow, very painful, calling people in, all hands on deck, right? They implemented an automation tool. Similar thing happened in November. The labor line, so they were tracking the different computation time and the humans. Labor line remained perfectly flat. They fired off like 500 extra bots, right? Problem solved, right? So totally scalable, right? Unlike a human workforce, think about a contact center, right? You have something go wrong with some customer, everyone starts calling in. I've worked with some of these contact centers, like down in Mexico. What do? They start stealing people from other accounts. They get people to come in from home. That all takes time, right? If you are automated and you can resolve some of these things with bots, you just fire up more bots, right? So, all right. Now, what I wanted to do was talk a second about a real example, because this is one of the ones that I'm maintaining at our company. So, if you looked at my resume at all and you saw where I worked, it would make no sense to you because I'm actually working at a VAR right now. So how many do people know what a VAR is, a value-added reseller? Anybody that doesn't, because I want to always make sure that people aren't. Okay, so a value-added reseller is, so you have all these people like Cisco that make equipment, right? Cisco doesn't want to be out there selling to clients, right? Especially small clients, right? So they produce this stuff, but they don't want to deal with like the 100-person shop or the 500-person shop. They'll have relationship with big companies, right? So you have companies like ourselves that will sell Cisco product, right? But we don't want to be in the shipping business or the warehouse business. So we have a distributor. So our products come from somebody else, but we own the relationship with the client, right? So we will go to the client. The client says, hey, look, I just opened a new data center. I just opened a new headquarters. I need a bunch of networking equipment. I don't know what I need. Our guys know what he needs, right? So we have architects. We put together a bill of material, right? We get that information to our distributor, who's Ingram Micro. Ingram Micro warehouses this stuff. They give us tremendous pricing because they get phenomenal pricing from Cisco, right? So it may sell for 10,000. Cisco, Ingram might get it for 2,500. We might get it from them for 2,700, right? So we can really give the customer a tremendous discount off a list price, and that's the VAR business, all right? The value add being, we can configure this for you. We can tell you what you need, right? We can get the product. We can get it at a way better price than you can get it for you. And by the way, we can also install it for you, all right? So that's kind of the business that the core company that I'm at does, okay? I was there to start an AI company under the same umbrella, but right now we're kind of focused on fixing some of the things in the mothership before you actually launch the AI company. So that's kind of what this says, right? So one of the things that we have to do is when a client says to us, I need X, right? I need this capability. We need to turn that into a quote for the client saying, okay, here are all the things you need, and here's the prices I can get them for you, get them to you for, okay? And that's a lot of stuff for us, right? So the first thing that we do is we create a trigger file that has all the pertinent information. Who's the client, right? Is Ingram Micro going to be involved in this? Because some of the stuff we don't get through Ingram Micro. It has a lot of important information. How much this client has this kind of relationship with us. So do we discount this off of list, or do we mark up our cost? There's different ways of handling how we price different clients. That's all contained in this trigger file, right? That we have to tell the bot, this is how to handle this one, right? So there's a trigger file involved. we go out to Cisco, we get the bill of material, because when we work with Cisco, either we've built it and our architects sanitize it or sanity check it with Cisco, and they'll say, yes, that's the correct bill of material. Oh, but you also should add these 3 things in as well, right? So they have the ultimate bill of material. We have to go out and get that. Then we combine that with, Cisco also sends it to Ingram, and then Ingram sends us a file that says, okay, got the bill of material, here's your prices, right? So we have that file. We have to combine that with the bill of material to make sure that nothing got dropped, right? And Ingram didn't always show things that were zeroed cost. They were just baked into the material, like it's a free item from Cisco because it comes bundled. So sometimes that didn't show up. So we kind of combine the two together. We get the client-specific pricing out of the trigger file, right? Then we start building a spreadsheet, right, that has our cost, you know, the discounts, the price to the client. Then we upload this to Salesforce, right? And get all the pertinent information about the parts in Salesforce, steal some of the Salesforce information about the customer to put it down in the Excel spreadsheet so we can fill that out to completion, because sometimes we use that as well, right? We compare things. So we'll actually say, okay, I upload this to Salesforce. It runs some of its own computations, right? It says, here's my total. And then we say, well, did you get the same total that the spreadsheet got? You know, because I want to make sure that nothing got dropped in going to Salesforce, right? And this actually bothered us quite a bit, because what happened was Salesforce rounds this way, or actually rounds this way, and Excel runs this way. So, you know, when we get the pricing, sometimes the pricing is out like 6 digits beyond the decimal point, right? So we kept getting these things that are going, didn't work. And you look at it and it's $550,000, and one quote came to 003 and one came to 002. It's like, really? We're throwing this out for a penny? And the whole process is aborted, right? So this had been going on before I got involved in this. And finally I got back in, I kept seeing all these failures, and they're not coming to my inbox. I'm like, what is this about? And he goes, I don't know, we have something off. So I said, is it a rounding problem? So I went back into Excel, went to Salesforce, found the rounding problem. But this is an example of what you talked about, Andrew, which is it's not always right. It's not always the easiest thing to fix it in the bot, right? So what I actually ended up doing is I went into Excel and I wrote a macro in Visual Basic. Rather than load this thing up to Salesforce with 6 extra decimal points, I just rounded it first. I said, let's round it first, then export it to Salesforce. That fixed the problem, right? But you have talked in the past with me, and I think even at the open talk, is sometimes you fix things inside the bot using bot capabilities, and sometimes you fix it outside because it's more efficient. So the bot actually executes the macro, but I wrote the macro in Visual Basic, right? So anyway, it runs the comparison, and then if everything's good, it actually will create a PDF and store the PDF and send an email out to the sales support person saying, we're good to go. Here's your quote, and here's all the supporting documents, the Ingram quote, the quote that we built, you know, and the PDF, right? And if it fails, it sends us all the associated documents saying, yeah, this didn't go so well. And it actually says, here's the line it failed at, right? So you can go right to that and say, what happened here, right? So, but just to give you an idea, this is about 2,700 lines of code, right? So the point that I think I was talking to Michael about earlier is when people tell you that RPA is really great because you don't have to be a coder, that's a quasi-true statement, right? Most of these tools take the whole part about worrying about where do I need commas, where do I need parentheses, where do I need curly brackets, right? What's the exact word for this when I want to do an if then else statement, right? It takes that kind of stuff off your plate, but you would be challenged to write anything of any kind of intensity with absolutely no programming experience, right? You have to understand if then else's and while loops and things like that, right? You can't do these things unless it's like the most rudimentary task, right? Without some kind of, so could a good business analyst who's comfortable with technology do it? Absolutely. We trained 400 of them at that telco I was talking about. They liked it so much, we'd like train 400 of the business analysts in these capabilities, right? So yes, a good business analyst could do it. Coder can do it better. And there are times, which we also talked about, again, I think was with Michael, where it's easier just to write code. So I mentioned this Salesforce interface. You will see when we get to the video, although we're going to speed it up, the Salesforce login process is really like way too time consuming. It doesn't always respond quickly, so we had to build in a delay. And it's like, wow. So if you're going to constantly go to Salesforce, there are times where I think we were talking about IQ bots and also meta bots, right? So you can write a meta bot, which is a piece of code, and say, let's just talk to Salesforce directly through code, essentially create an API, right? Because I'm going to use that all the time, and I've got a bunch of bots that want to talk to Salesforce and things for other than just this. They can reuse that same interface. So there's times you actually just do write code. So like I said, take it with a grain of salt when they say, yeah, you don't need IT guys anymore, right? That's not really true. I actually created a tagline on a deck I was presenting to a client, again, in town here. And because we were working with the CIO, but he was trying to sell this concept to the business, right? And I said to him, I said, here's the tagline, intelligent automation, driven by the business, powered by IT. And the reason I say that is because IT learned a lot of very painful lessons over many, many, many years. Hence why we got to things like ITIL, right? And IT service management. There's a reason that companies are moving to ITIL now. It's from the pain that we've experienced for years and years and years. This is no different, right? If you go out and write a bot and it's talking to 5 different systems, right? And a month from now, one of those system interface changes, guess what? Your bot is broken. It's definitely broken. How do you solve that? You make it part of the change management process. You put it in a CMDB, you flag it as a CI, you say, here are the 5 CIs I rely on. By the way, one of them is those systems. As soon as change management triggers, it raises that CI up and says, who depends on this? The bot does. Oh, okay, we need to consider that when we make this change. And you fix the bot. So that's the IT process. So you might want to have the business users drive, like, here's my opportunities, and maybe even get good at writing it. But you should manage these things the same way you manage the IT environment, right? With change control, configuration management, and things like that. There's no reason not to.